For 3 months in 1888, fear and panic stalked the streets of London's East End. During these months, 5 women were murdered and horribly mutilated by a man who became known as Jack the Ripper. The culprit was never captured or even identified, and Jack the Ripper remained one of England's and the world's most infamous criminals. All 5 killings attributed to Jack the Ripper took place within a mile of each other, in or near the Whitechapel district of London's East End, from August 7th to September 10th, 1888. Several other murders occurring around that time period have also been investigated as the work of the Leather Apron, another nickname given to the murderer. A number of letters were allegedly sent by the killer to the London Metropolitan Police Service, often known as Scotland Yard, taunting the officers about his gruesome activities and speculating on murders to come. The moniker Jack the Ripper originated from a letter which may have been a hoax published at the time of the attacks. In the late 1800s, London's East End was a place that was viewed by citizens with either compassion or utter contempt. Despite being an area where skilled immigrants, mainly Jews and Russians, came to begin a new life and start businesses, the district was notorious for violence and crime. Prostitution was only illegal if the practice caused a public disturbance, and thousands of brothels and low-rent lodging houses provided services during the late 19th century. At that time, the death or murder of a working girl was rarely reported in the press or discussed within polite society. The reality was that ladies of the night were subject to physical attacks, which sometimes resulted in death. Among these common violent crimes was the attack of English prostitute Emma Smith, who was beaten and taken advantage of with an object by 4 men. Smith, who later died of peritonitis, is remembered as one of the many unfortunate female victims who were killed by gangs demanding protection money. However, the series of killings that began in August 1888 stood out from other violent crime of the time, marked by sadistic butchery. Jack the Ripper didn't just snuff out life with a knife. He mutilated and disemboweled women, removing organs such as kidneys and uteruses, and his crimes seemed to portray an abhorrence for the entire female gender. But Jack the Ripper's murders suddenly stopped in the fall of 1888. But since then, London citizens continued to demand answers, but they would not come even more than a century later. The ongoing case, which has spawned on an industry of books, films, TV series, and historical tours, has met with a number of hindrances, including lack of evidence, a gamut of misinformation, false testimony, and tight regulations by the Scotland Yard. Since the murders, many names have been linked with the notorious murderer. And today, we'll look into the top of these suspects. William Henry Bury. Bury was first suspected in 1889 due to the similarities between his wife's murder and the canonical 5 Ripper victims. Although Bury was arrested and executed in Dundee, Scotland, he had been residing in Bow near Whitechapel during the 3-month murderous spree of Jack the Ripper. If you were to consider all 11 unsolved Whitechapel murders that took place between April 1888 and February 1891, Bury resided in Bow from October 1887 to January 1889, placing him in the area at the appropriate time. It was reported that graffiti at his Dundee flat that said, "Jack the Ripper is at the back of this door," and "Jack the Ripper is in the cellar," was found, leading some to believe that Ellen was murdered to prevent her from identifying Bury as Jack the Ripper. Although Bury pleaded not guilty to his wife's murder, 2 days before his execution, Bury confessed to a reverend that he had killed his wife, and at the urging of the reverend, he wrote a confession which he asked to be held back until after his execution. Bury confessed that he had strangled Ellen during a drunken row, then had attempted to dismember her body for disposal, but was too squeamish to continue. Although his confession doesn't match expert testimony from the time, his confession just days before his death to a reverend that he asked to be held back until he was dead can be seen as a confession of his sins. During the Jack the Ripper investigation, a detective was sent to interview Bury in Dundee, and although he was investigated, Bury was not considered to be a viable suspect. Montague Don Druitt, found floating in the River Thames. Although there is very little evidence to implicate Druitt, he is considered by many to be the #1 suspect in the case. The son of a medical practitioner, Druitt fitted the assumption of the detectives at the time that due to the gruesome disembowelment and removal of organs, Jack the Ripper would have had the skills of a physician or butcher. The suspicion fell on Druitt after the memorandum of Macnaghten, who investigated the Ripper's killings for Scotland Yard, became public. A doctor of about 41 years of age and of fairly good family who disappeared at the time of the Miller's Court murder and whose body was found floating in the Thames on 31st December, 7 weeks after the said murder. The body was said to have been in the water for a month or more. From private information, I have little doubt but that his own family suspected this man of being the Whitechapel murderer. It was alleged that he was insane. Although Macnaghten did incorrectly age Druitt at 41, Druitt was 31 at the time of his death. It was clear that Macnaghten was implicating Druitt due to the details of his suicide. There is little to no evidence of Druitt being the Ripper. Druitt resided in Blackheath and had no connection to Whitechapel. His only connection to the Ripper case is that made by Macnaghten. James Maybrick, suspected arsenic poisoning. His wife Florence was arrested, convicted, and then released on re-examination of her case. Maybrick was not considered a suspect at the time of the murder or even mentioned in the Ripper case until more than a century after his death. Not surprisingly, as he was a cotton merchant residing in Liverpool. In 1992, a diary surfaced taking credit for the slaying of the 5 Ripper victims as well as 2 other murders. Although a name is not mentioned in this diary, it is widely accepted due to references and hints throughout that this was Maybrick's diary.
Then in 1993, a gentleman's pocket watch was discovered that had J. Maybrick scratched over the cover alongside the initials of all 5 Ripper victims and the words "I am Jack."
The watch was made in 1847 or 1848, and testing had proved that the engraving outdates the vast majority of superficial surface scratch on the watch, and although the engraving cannot be conclusively proven, it is considered to be of substantial age. Although the watch has some credibility in regard to its authenticity, the diary evidence is surrounded in doubt. Firstly questioned was the discovery of the diary, as the story changed from it being given to him by a friend to being handed down in his wife's family. The diary itself is a genuine Victorian scrapbook, but 20 pages have been torn out. The handwriting style had been questioned due to it seeming more 20th century than Victorian, and the ink had been tested numerous times to no solid conclusion. Since the discovery of the diary and pocket watch, it is thought that his wife Florence had discovered that her husband was Jack the Ripper and decided to put an end to his life to stop the killings. However, this is rumor and there is no evidence to support the theory. Walter Richard Siker. Siker was a British painter who took inspiration from the Ripper case. He believed that he had lodged in the room once used by Jack the Ripper, as his landlady had suspected a previous lodger. For 70 years, no one mentioned Sikert's name in connection with the case, until an author, Stephen Knight, claimed that Sikert had been an accomplice in the murders, due to information gained by Sikert's illegitimate son, Joseph Gorman. The real interest into Sikert as the Ripper came in 2002 when crime novelist Patricia Cornwell stated that she believed Sikert was the Ripper. Cornwell had purchased 31 of Sikert's paintings in the search for DNA evidence, and she has claimed that she was able to prove that mitochondrial DNA connected Sikert to a Ripper letter. Other than the claims of Cornwell and Knight, there is no other evidence that suggests that Sikert was anything more than an artist inspired by the dark and sadistic Ripper case. In recent years, British detective Trevor Marriott, who had long been investigating the Jack the Ripper murders, made headlines when he was denied access to uncensored documents surrounding the case by the Metropolitan Police. According to a 2011 ABC News article, London officers refused to give Marriott the files because they include protected information about police informants, thereby potentially dissuading testimony by modern-day informants. In 2014, author and amateur sleuth Russell Edwards claimed to have determined the identity of Jack the Ripper by DNA results obtained from a shawl belonging to one of the victims, Catherine Eddowes. Edwards asserted the evidence points to Aaron Kosminski, a Polish immigrant and one of the prime suspects in the grisly murders.
The topic resurfaced when two biochemists published the results of their tests on the shawl in a March 2019 edition for Journal of Forensic Sciences,
again figuring Kosminski as a likely match. Other critics of the Kosminski theory have pointed out that there is no evidence the shawl was ever at the crime scene. New tests are not the first attempts to identify Jack the Ripper from DNA. Another genetic analysis of letters claimed the murderer could have even been a woman. Jack the Ripper has been a topic of news stories for more than 120 years, and will likely continue to be for decades to come. What do you think? Will we ever come to the bottom of this mystery?